They had called her murderer, deceiver, Black Widow, names that slithered through Copper Springs like poisoned water. Now, as Isabel Reed stood on the gallows with the nooses rough hemp scratching her throat, they simply called her condemned. But fate holds peculiar cards, and sometimes the most dangerous hand is played by the man no one saw coming. The gallows had been erected overnight in the town square, its fresh-cut pines still weeping sap beneath the merciless August sun. The platform stood 8 feet tall, dominating the dusty center of Copper Springs like a throne built for death rather than royalty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sweat gathered beneath collars and bonnets as the townsfolk pressed forward. Children were hoisted onto shoulders for a better view. No one wanted to miss the hanging of the woman who had murdered 3 husbands. Isabel stood barefoot on the rough wooden planks, her prison-issued dress hanging loosely on her once-curved frame. 6 weeks in the town jail had hollowed her cheeks and dulled the famous copper hair that had been her namesake. Now it hung in a simple braid down her back, the vibrant color muted by dust and despair. Her hands were bound before her with thick rope that had rubbed her wrists raw, yet despite everything, her posture remained straight, her emerald eyes clear and unflinching as they swept across the faces she had known all her life. The schoolteacher who had taught her to read, the blacksmith who had fixed her father's plough each spring, the baker who had given her day-old bread when times were hard. Now they watched, solemn and silent, as Sheriff Wyatt adjusted the noose around her neck. Not one of them met her gaze. "Isabel Reed," Judge Porter's voice carried across the square, the formal tone doing little to disguise his disdain. "You have been found guilty of the murders of Jonathan Reed, Thomas Blackwood, and Samuel Fletcher, all by means of poison administered with malicious intent. Have you any final words before sentence is carried out?" Isabel's lips parted slightly. She had not spoken a single word since they found Samuel dead in their bed, foam crusted at the corner of his mouth, her nightgown spattered with the remnants of his final violent breaths. Not during her arrest, not during the mockery they called a trial, not even when they read the verdict, guilty on all counts. Her silence had been her only rebellion, the one thing they couldn't take from her. But now, facing eternity, words bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, words of truth, of innocence, of the strange coincidences that had painted her as a monster. Before she could speak them, however, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. "Stop!" The voice cut through the murmuring townsfolk like a knife, deep, commanding, and eerily familiar to the older residents of Copper Springs. The crowd parted reluctantly, revealing a man astride a midnight black stallion. His duster was grey with trail dust, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. But there was no mistaking the twin Remingtons holstered at his hips or the way he sat his horse, like a king surveying his kingdom. Sheriff Wyatt's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "This is official business, stranger. Best move along." The rider nudged his horse forward, each hoofbeat punctuating the sudden silence that had fallen over the square. As he approached the gallows, he finally looked up, revealing a face weathered by sun and hardship. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and his eyes, cold as winter sky, fixed directly on Isabel. "There will be no hanging today," he said, his voice carrying the rough edge of a man unaccustomed to explaining himself. "That woman is mine." Judge Porter stepped forward, puffing himself up with judicial indignation. "Sir, this woman has been tried and convicted." "That woman," the stranger interrupted, "is Eleanor Maxwell, my wife." He removed his hat in a gesture that might have been respectful if not for the dangerous glint in his eye. "And Jackson Maxwell has come to take her home." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Old-timers crossed themselves. Mothers pulled children closer. The name Maxwell hadn't been spoken aloud in Copper Springs for nearly a decade, not since the notorious Maxwell Gang had terrorized the Western Territories. Their leader, Jackson Maxwell, had reportedly died in a shootout with federal marshals near the Mexican border. Yet here he stood, or rather sat astride his massive horse, very much alive and claiming the condemned woman as his long-lost bride. Sheriff. Wyatt had gone pale beneath his weathered tan. Jackson Maxwell died at Rio Seco, he managed, voice unsteady. Marshals confirmed it. The stranger's mouth curved into something too sharp to be called a smile. Reports of my death were convenient. His eyes never left Isabel's face. Now, cut her down before I do it myself. Something unspoken passed between the sheriff and the judge, a calculation of risk, of odds, of the tales that had followed the Maxwell name for years. Tales of 20 men gunned down at Silver Ridge, of train robberies executed with military precision, of a man who never missed and never forgot. A slight. This woman has killed 3 husbands. Judge Porter tried again, though his voice had lost its authority. She's been tried according to territorial law. Impossible, Maxwell said flatly. She couldn't have married anyone else. We never divorced. He fixed the judge with a stare that had made braver men falter. You're about to hang an innocent woman for crimes she couldn't have committed. Her marriages weren't legal, which means she's not guilty of killing any husbands. Murmurs swept through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Isabel stood frozen, the noose still tight around her neck, staring at the stranger who claimed to be her husband. There was no recognition in her eyes, only confusion and the first flicker of something that might have been hope. I don't remember you, she said, her voice rough from weeks of disuse. They were the first words she'd spoken since her arrest, and they hung in the air like the prelude to a storm. Maxwell's expression didn't change. You wouldn't, not after what they did to you. He turned back to the sheriff. I have documentation. Marriage certificate dated 8 years ago in Silverton, Colorado Territory. From his saddlebag, he withdrew a folded document yellowed with age and handed it to the sheriff. Sheriff Wyatt examined the paper with trembling hands, then passed it to the judge. The crowd held its collective breath as Judge Porter's face drained. Of color, it appears to be authentic, the judge admitted reluctantly. Of course it's authentic, Maxwell said. Now cut her loose, or the next trial in Copper Springs will be for the murder of your judge and sheriff. The threat was delivered with such casual confidence that no one doubted he would follow through. After a long, tense moment, Judge Porter nodded to the sheriff. With visible reluctance, Wyatt climbed the steps to the gallows and removed the noose from Isabel's neck. Her knees buckled slightly as the rough hemp slid away, leaving an angry red circle against her pale skin. This doesn't change the fact that 3 men are dead, the sheriff muttered as he cut the ropes binding her wrists. No, Maxwell agreed, but it changes who's responsible for finding out why. He extended a gloved hand toward Isabel. Come, Eleanor, we've lost enough time. Isabel, or Eleanor, stood unmoving, rubbing her chafed wrists as she stared at the stranger claiming to be her husband. Why should I go with you? She asked, caution threading through her voice. I don't know you. Something flickered behind Maxwell's eyes, perhaps pain, perhaps anger. Because the alternative is staying in a town that was ready to stretch your neck without evidence. He leaned forward slightly in his saddle. I'm offering you life, Eleanor. What they're offering is just a slower death. The logic was irrefutable. Isabel looked around at the faces of her neighbors, the people she'd lived alongside for years. Not one of them had spoken in her defense. Not one had questioned the convenient narrative that painted her as a calculating murderess. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. With a deep breath that seemed to straighten her spine, She stepped forward and took Maxwell's outstretched hand. He pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion, her bare feet finding the stirrups as if by memory. "This isn't over," Sheriff Wyatt called as Maxwell turned his horse. "Those men are still dead." Maxwell paused, looking back over his shoulder. "You're right about that, Sheriff. It's just beginning." Without another word, he nudged his horse forward, and the crowd parted like water around stone. As they rode out of Copper Springs, Isabel clung to the waist of the stranger who had saved her from the noose, her mind racing with questions. Who was this man? Was she truly Eleanor Maxwell? And if so, why couldn't she remember? But one thought burned brighter than all others. She was alive, and for the first time in weeks, the future contained something other than a swinging rope. The landscape changed gradually as they rode, the dusty flats of Copper Springs giving way to rolling hills dotted with pine and scrub oak. They traveled in silence, Maxwell focused on the trail ahead, Isabel lost in the sensation of freedom, the wind on her face, the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the absence of walls and bars and watching eyes. It was nearly sunset when they crested a hill and a small cabin came into view, nestled against a stand of pines with a creek running nearby. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, suggesting someone waited inside. Maxwell dismounted and helped Isabel down, his hands impersonal but not unkind. "What is this place?" she asked, eyeing the cabin warily. "Somewhere safe," he replied. "No one knows about it, except my most trusted men." As if on cue, the cabin door opened, and a mountain of a man stepped out, rifle in hand. His beard was shot through with grey, but his posture suggested the strength of his younger years remained intact. "Took you long enough?" the man called, his accent thick with the hills of Tennessee. "Was starting to think they'd strung you up alongside her." "It was a close thing, Ezra," Maxwell admitted. He guided Isabel forward with a light touch at her elbow. "Eleanor, this is Ezra Jenkins, one of the few men I'd trust with my life." Ezra studied her with keen eyes, then nodded once, apparently satisfied with what he saw. "She don't remember nothing, does she?" "No," Maxwell confirmed. "Just as the doctor said." Isabel pulled away from his touch, anger flaring suddenly. "Stop talking about me as if I'm not here. I want explanations, now." Maxwell and Ezra exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Then Maxwell sighed. "You'll get them. But first, you need food, rest, and proper clothes." He gestured toward the cabin. "There's a bath drawn inside. Clean clothes on the bed. When you're ready, we'll talk." The promise of hot water was too tempting to resist. Despite her suspicion, Isabel found herself nodding and following Ezra into the cabin. The interior was simple but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 4 chairs, a corner kitchen area, and 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms. A copper tub steamed behind a privacy screen, the scent of pine soap drifting invitingly. "Take your time," Ezra said gruffly. "There's stew when you're hungry." Then he retreated, closing the door behind him and leaving her alone. Isabel stood, still absorbing the sudden silence, the absence of prying eyes for the first time in weeks. Then, with hands that trembled slightly, she began to undress, letting the prison-issued garments fall to the floor like the shed skin of a creature transforming into something new. The water was gloriously hot, and she sank into it with a sigh that seemed to release weeks of tension. As she scrubbed away the grime of captivity, she tried to make sense of the day's events. Was she truly Eleanor Maxwell, wife to one of the most notorious outlaws in the territories? Or was this an elaborate ruse, and if so, to what end? And more pressingly, why couldn't she remember anything from before her life in Copper Springs? She had arrived in town 4 years ago with no memory of her past, a fact she had shared with the doctor who treated her after she was found unconscious. Beside an overturned stagecoach, The only clue to her identity had been a handkerchief embroidered with the initials IR in her pocket. The town had christened her Isabel Reed, and she had accepted the name, building a new life from the fragments available to her. Now that life had shattered, and she was adrift once more, dependent on the word of a stranger with dangerous eyes, and a reputation for violence. After her bath, she found clothes laid out as promised. A simple blue calico dress, modest but clean, cotton undergarments, and soft leather boots that fit surprisingly well. A brush had been provided and she worked. It threw her damp copper hair until it shone. The woman who looked back at her from the small mirror above the wash basin seemed like a stranger, neither the respected widow Isabel Reed nor this mysterious Eleanor Maxwell, but someone in between, unformed and uncertain. When she finally emerged from behind the screen, she found Maxwell seated alone at the table, a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses before him. He had removed his duster and gun belt, though she noted the weapons remained within easy reach, draped over a nearby chair. Without the shadow of his hat, his features were clearer. Strong jawline, straight nose, eyes the color of a winter sky. The scar that ran down his face looked like it had been made by a knife, deliberate rather than accidental. "Feeling better?" he asked, pouring amber liquid into both glasses. "Cleaner," she corrected, taking the seat across from him but leaving the whiskey untouched. "Not better. Not until I understand what's happening." Maxwell studied her for a long moment, then nodded, as if coming to a decision. "What do you remember about your life before Copper Springs?" She hesitated, unused to discussing the void that existed before her arrival in town. "Nothing. I was found after a stagecoach accident. The doctor said I had a severe concussion. My memories never returned." "It wasn't a stagecoach accident," Maxwell said quietly. "It was an ambush, orchestrated by Federal Marshal James Hargrove. He'd been hunting the Maxwell gang for years without success. When he couldn't catch me, he decided to use you as bait." Isabel's heart quickened. "You're saying I was really your wife? That I was part of an outlaw gang?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Eleanor Maxwell was never an outlaw. She was a school teacher who made the questionable decision to marry one. He took a sip of whiskey. "We met in Silverton. I was there for business. You were new in town, fresh from Boston, full of ideas about educating the children of miners and frontiersmen." "Boston?" The word triggered nothing. No memory, no familiarity, just another piece of a puzzle she couldn't see. "Your father was a professor at Harvard. When he died, you decided to head west. You had notions about making a difference." His voice held a mixture of admiration and old pain. "We were married 6 months after we met, against the advice of everyone you knew. Why would I marry an outlaw? Because back then I wasn't just an outlaw to you." His eyes held hers. "I was a man trying to change. And for 2 years I did. We had a small ranch outside Silverton. I hung up my guns. We were going to start a family." His knuckles whitened around his glass. "Then Hargrove found us." "What happened?" she whispered, drawn into the story despite her skepticism. "They came at dawn, burned our home, took you, left me for dead with a bullet in my chest." He downed the rest of his whiskey. "When I recovered, I tracked them to Fort Laramie. By then, Hargrove had already started his experiment." "Experiment?" Maxwell's expression darkened. "Hargrove had a theory about memory, that with the right combination of trauma, isolation, and suggestion, a person could be made to forget their entire past. Create a clean slate to write a new story. He'd tried it on prisoners before. Never successfully." He refilled his glass. "You were his perfect subject. No family looking for you. Married to a man presumed dead." Isabel's hands began to tremble. "You're saying he deliberately took my memories, made me into someone else?" Isabel Reed was his creation. A widow with a tragic past, placed in a remote town where no one would ask too many questions. Maxwell's voice was flat, controlled, but rage simmered beneath the surface. By the time I found you, you were already established in Copper Springs. You didn't recognize me, and Hargrove had men watching. If I tried to take you then, they would have killed us both. So you just left me there? Disbelief and anger colored her voice. I left and gathered resources, built a new gang, tracked down everyone involved in what happened to us. His eyes met hers, cold and uncompromising. One by one I found them, all except Hargrove. He disappeared 3 years ago. And my husbands, she could barely say the word, were not accidents. Maxwell leaned forward. Jonathan Reed was a U.S. Marshal working undercover. Thomas Blackwood was Hargrove's cousin. Samuel Fletcher was a hired gun. His voice hardened. They weren't there to love you, Eleanor. They were there to watch you, and to kill you if your memory ever returned. Isabel felt the blood drain from her face. You're saying they married me as part of some assignment? Hargrove was thorough and paranoid. He needed to ensure his experiment remained controlled. Maxwell's jaw tightened. When I started dismantling his network, he got desperate. The husbands weren't just watching anymore. They were a countdown to your execution. But the poison, she began, was never yours. Maxwell's certainty was absolute. Samuel Fletcher poisoned himself after he received a telegram warning that I was closing in. He made sure you'd be blamed. The perfect end to Hargrove's experiment. The subject destroyed. The evidence buried with her. Isabel stood abruptly, too overwhelmed to remain seated. She paced the small cabin, mind racing. If what Maxwell said was true, her entire life for the past 4 years had been a construct, a laboratory for a madman's theories. She had been manipulated, watched and controlled, all without her knowledge or consent. I don't remember any of this, she said finally, turning to face him. Not you, not Eleanor Maxwell, not Boston or Silverton or a burning ranch. Why should I believe you? Maxwell reached inside his shirt and withdrew a locket on a long chain. He opened it and passed it to her without a word. Inside was a miniature photograph of a younger, smiling woman with copper hair arranged in an elegant knot. Beside her stood Maxwell himself, less weathered, the scar on his face still fresh and angry. They were dressed formally, her hand resting on his arm, his expression softer than she could imagine possible for the hard man before her now. "Our wedding day," he said simply. Isabel stared at the image, searching for a spark of recognition, some confirmation that the woman in the photograph was truly her. But there was nothing. Only the undeniable physical resemblance and the weight of a story too elaborate to be invention. "Why now?" she asked, closing the locket carefully. "Why wait 4 years to come for me?" "Because Hargrove is back." Maxwell's voice was grim. "He surfaced in Denver last month. When he learned I was still alive, still looking for him, he sent orders to eliminate you. Samuel's suicide was just the beginning. If I hadn't reached Copper Springs today, you would be dead, and Hargrove would have won." Isabel sank back into her chair, the locket still clutched in her hand. The magnitude of what he was telling her was almost incomprehensible. Federal marshals performing psychological experiments, a conspiracy spanning years, her own identity erased and rewritten. "What happens now?" she asked, surprising herself. With the steadiness of her voice, Maxwell studied her, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "Now we find Hargrove before he disappears again. We make him pay for what he did to you, to us." He hesitated, then added more softly, "And maybe along the way we find pieces of what we lost." Isabel nodded slowly, decision crystallizing. Whether Maxwell's story was truth or elaborate fiction, one fact remained. He had saved her from the gallows when no one else would. And somewhere, in the tangle of claims and counterclaims, lay answers she had sought for 4 years. "I'll go with you," she said. "Not because I believe I'm Eleanor Maxwell, not yet. but because you're offering the one thing no one else has, the chance to discover who I really am." Maxwell didn't smile, but some of the tension left his shoulders. He raised his glass in a silent toast, and after a moment's hesitation, Isabel picked up hers and did the same. Outside, the sun slipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire. Inside the cabin, two strangers bound by a shared past, remembered by one, forgotten by the other, prepared to embark on a journey toward truth, justice, and the ghosts of a life destroyed. Isabel didn't know if she would find herself along the way, but for the first time since waking in Copper Springs with no memory, she felt something stir within her. Not just hope, but determination. The noose had been cheated today. Tomorrow she would be dawn broke over the cabin in a wash of gold and pink, filtering through the small window beside the bed where Isabel lay awake. She hadn't slept more than scattered hours, her mind too crowded with questions and contradictions. The soft bed with its clean quilt should have been a luxury after weeks on a jail cell cot, but comfort proved elusive when her entire sense of self hung in the balance. She rose quietly and dressed in clothes she'd found in a trunk at the foot of the bed, a pair of sturdy riding pants, a simple white shirt, and a leather vest that fit as if made for her. Perhaps it had been. The thought sent an unsettling ripple through her consciousness. When she emerged into the main room, she found it empty, save for a pot of coffee warming on the stove and a plate of biscuits covered with a cloth. Through the window, she could see Maxwell and Ezra by the corral, deep in conversation as they saddled horses. The morning light softened Maxwell's hard edges, making him appear almost ordinary. A rancher preparing for a day's work rather than an outlaw with a legendary reputation. Isabel poured herself coffee and stepped onto the porch, breathing in the scent of pine and damp earth. The mountains rose around the cabin like sentinels, their peaks still dusted with snow despite the August heat. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely unfamiliar. "You're up early," Maxwell's voice came from behind her. He climbed the steps to join her, his own coffee mug in hand. He had shaved, she noticed, revealing a stronger jawline beneath the stubble and making the scar on his face stand out in starker contrast. "I'm not sure I ever really slept," she admitted, turning to face him. "Too many ghosts in that room." Something flickered in his eyes, understanding perhaps, or shared pain. "Memories have a way of finding us, even when we think they're lost." "Not memories," she corrected. "Ghosts. Shadows of a person I might have been." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant call of a hawk circling above the pines. Finally, Isabel asked the question that had kept her awake most of the night. "If I was Eleanor Maxwell, why didn't I go back to being her when you removed me from Copper Springs? Why am I still this?" She gestured to herself, frustration evident in her movement. Maxwell leaned against the porch railing, considering his response. "Memory isn't a book you can simply reopen to the right page," he said finally. "What Hargrove did to you, it wasn't just suggestion or isolation. There were drugs involved, experimental compounds developed during the war. What kind of drugs? The kind that leave scars on the mind. The doctor who examined you afterward, before you were placed in Copper Springs, said you might never recover what was taken." His voice remained even, but his knuckles whitened around his coffee mug. "Or you might recover everything all at once. There was no way to predict." Isabel absorbed this, a chill spreading through her despite the morning warmth. "So I might never remember being Eleanor, or you might remember her tomorrow." Maxwell met her gaze directly. "Either way, we move forward." "Against Hargrove." "Yes." She studied him, trying to reconcile the notorious outlaw of legend with the man standing before her, controlled, patient, his rage contained like banked coals. This isn't just about justice for me, is it? It's personal for you. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Perceptive. That was always your gift. Tell me about her, Isabel said suddenly. About Eleanor. Not the facts. You shared those last night. Tell me who she was. Maxwell looked away, his gaze fixing on the distant mountains, as if the answer lay somewhere in their heights. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Then he spoke, his voice lower, almost gentle. She loved thunderstorms, would sit on the porch of our ranch and count the seconds between lightning and thunder. He took a sip of coffee. She had a habit of tucking pencils into her hair while teaching, then forgetting they were there. She couldn't abide rudeness, but had endless patience for honest mistakes. She sang when she thought no one was listening, old folk songs her grandmother taught her. As he spoke, Isabel watched the transformation in his face, the hardness giving way to something softer, more vulnerable. This wasn't the fearsome Jackson Maxwell of frontier legend. This was simply a man remembering a woman he had loved. She believed people could change, he continued. That belief was her strength and her weakness. She sounds remarkable, Isabel said quietly. I'm sorry I can't remember her for you. Maxwell's gaze returned to her, sharp and assessing. You're not dead, Eleanor. Neither is she. She's in there somewhere. He straightened, the moment of openness passing like a cloud shadow. Ezra's preparing the horses. We ride in an hour. Where? To? Silver Creek. There's someone there who might help us locate Hargrove. After he departed, Isabel remained on the porch, trying to conjure any echo of the woman he had described. Did she still love thunderstorms? Did music still move her? Nothing resonated. Nothing felt like a missing piece sliding into place. And yet, something about Maxwell's description had stirred an odd familiarity. Not a memory exactly, but a sense of recognition, as if she had caught a glimpse of herself in a fogged mirror. An hour later, they set out from the cabin, a small caravan of 3 riders heading west. Ezra led, his massive frame easy in the saddle, rifle balanced across his thighs. Maxwell rode beside Isabel, his posture alert, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. They had provided her with a revolver, which now rested in a holster at her hip, an unfamiliar weight that nonetheless felt necessary. Did I know how to use one of these before? She asked, as they followed a narrow trail through a stand of aspens. You were a fair shot, Maxwell replied. Not from inclination, but from necessity. Life with me required certain precautions. Isabel considered this, trying to imagine the circumstances that would have led a Boston schoolteacher to take up firearms. Did you teach me? He nodded. You were a quick study, determined. And did I ever have to use it against someone? A muscle ticked in Maxwell's jaw. Once, a bounty hunter found our ranch while I was away. You wounded him, saved yourself. He glanced at her. You had nightmares for weeks afterward. She absorbed this information, turning it over like an unusual stone found in a familiar creek. Violence didn't feel foreign to her body. The weight of the gun, the stance required to fire it, these seemed to reside somewhere in her muscle memory. But the idea of Eleanor, educated, gentle Eleanor with her pencils tucked in her hair, shooting, a man, was harder to reconcile. They rode steadily through the morning, stopping briefly to water the horses at a swift-running stream. As Isabel knelt to splash water on her face, she caught sight of her reflection, copper hair now pulled back in a practical braid, green eyes shadowed with uncertainty, the fading mark of the noose still visible around her throat. She touched the tender skin gingerly. It will fade, Maxwell said, appearing beside her. All scars do, eventually. Some scars aren't visible, she replied, rising to her feet. He nodded once, understanding in his eyes. Those take longer, they continued. Westward, the terrain growing rougher as they ascended into higher country. By midday, they had reached a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of pine forest and meadow. In the far distance, smoke rose from what must be the settlement of Silver Creek. "We'll make camp here tonight," Maxwell announced. "Enter town at first." "Light? Why wait?" Isabel asked. "We could reach it by dusk." "Silver Creek has changed since you knew it," Ezra interjected, dismounting with a grunt. "Mining company bought most of it up. They run patrols after dark, shoot first, identify later." "Not the kind of welcome we need," Maxwell added, helping her down from her horse. His hands were impersonal but careful, releasing her the moment. Her feet touched ground. As Ezra set about making camp, Maxwell led Isabel to the edge of the ridge. The view stretched for miles, the landscape painted in shades of green and gold beneath the afternoon sun. "You used to say the mountains made you feel both small and significant," he said after a moment. "Small in the face of their grandeur, significant because you were part of something so vast and enduring." "I said that?" The idea resonated strangely. "On our wedding night," his voice remained neutral, but she could sense the current of memory running beneath his words. "We camped on a ridge much like this one. You insisted on sleeping under the stars rather than at the hotel in town." Isabel closed her eyes, trying to summon any fragment of that night. The feel of mountain air, the canopy of stars, the presence of the man beside her. Nothing came, only the hollow echo of absence where memory should live. "I'm sorry," she said, opening her eyes. "It's just not there." Maxwell's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle squaring of shoulders, as if bracing against disappointment. "We should help Ezra with camp." As dusk settled over the ridge, they gathered around a small, carefully banked fire. Ezra had prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and biscuits, which they ate in companionable silence. The big man seemed content to let conversation ebb and flow naturally, his gaze often drifting to the stars emerging above. "You mentioned someone in Silver Creek who might help us," Isabel said finally, setting aside her tin plate. "Who is it?" Maxwell and Ezra exchanged a glance before Maxwell answered. "Dr. Abraham Chen. He worked with the Union Army during the war, researching counter-agents to Confederate chemical weapons. After the war, he continued his research independently." "And how does he connect to Hargrove?" "He doesn't, not directly. But he knows more about the compounds Hargrove used on you than anyone still living." Maxwell's eyes reflected the firelight, making them appear almost amber rather than blue. "He might be able to help you recover what was taken." Isabel's pulse quickened. "You mean restore my memories?" "Possibly. At minimum, he might help us understand the limits of what Hargrove did. Knowledge is leverage. Dr. Chen ain't exactly welcoming these days," Ezra added, pouring coffee from a battered pot. "Since the mining company moved in, he's gone to ground. Treats miners injured in company accidents, but keeps to himself otherwise." "Why?" Isabel asked. "Because Silver Creek Consolidated Mining don't appreciate doctors who document their safety violations," Ezra replied with a grim smile. "Chen's got a file thick as my arm on fatal accidents that weren't so accidental. The company has a connection to Hargrove," Maxwell explained. "They provide funding for some of his projects in exchange for certain considerations." "What kind of considerations?" "Workers who don't complain, don't organize, don't remember injuries or unsafe conditions." His voice hardened. "Hargrove's techniques have applications beyond breaking one woman's memory." The implications settled over Isabel like a physical weight. What had been done to her wasn't just personal cruelty, it was part of something larger, more systematic. The thought was both horrifying and oddly comforting. Horror at the scale, comfort in knowing she hadn't been singled out for her connection to Maxwell alone. "How do we find Chen if he's gone to ground?" she asked. "I have ways," Maxwell said simply. Later, as Ezra snored softly from his bedroll and the fire burned down to embers, Isabel found herself unable to sleep. She sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars scattered like salt across the velvet darkness. Maxwell sat nearby, keeping watch, his profile sharp against the night sky. "What if I never remember?" she asked suddenly, the question that had haunted her all day finally finding voice. "What if Eleanor is truly gone?" Maxwell was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Then we start again. Just like that. You'd accept me as whoever I am now." He turned to her then, his expression softened by shadow. "You weren't just my wife, Eleanor. You were my conscience, my chance at something better." His voice remained steady, matter of fact. "That remains true whether you remember our vows or not, and if I choose to be someone else entirely, someone who isn't Eleanor or Isabel, then that would be your right." There was no hesitation in his response. "I didn't come for you in Copper Springs to claim you. I came because you deserved the truth. What you do with it is your choice." Isabel studied him, trying to reconcile. This thoughtful, principled man with the notorious outlaw whose name had made hardened lawmen pale. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You said that the first time we met, too." Before she could respond, a sound caught their attention, the distant crack of a twig breaking beneath a boot. Maxwell was on his feet in an instant, gun drawn, motioning for her to stay low. "Ezra," he whispered, and the big man was awake immediately, rifle in hand, moving to a position behind a nearby boulder. Isabel's heart hammered as she reached for her own weapon, the feel of the grip unexpectedly familiar in her palm. They waited in tense silence, ears straining. Then another sound. A horse nickering, quickly hushed. "Company," Maxwell murmured. "At least 3 coming from the East Trail." "Copper Springs," Isabel whispered. He shook his head. "Too fast. They'd have had to ride through the night." His eyes narrowed as he scanned the darkness. "It's Hargrove. He knows we're coming for Chen." Fear gripped her, not just of physical danger, but of being taken again, of losing what little sense of self she had managed to construct. How would he know? "He has informants everywhere. Stay down, stay behind me." Maxwell shifted position, finding better cover. "Ezra, if this goes badly, I'll get her out," the big man promised. "You have my word." The sound of approaching riders grew clearer. 3, perhaps 4, moving with caution through the trees below the ridge. Maxwell glanced at Isabel, his expression grave. "If you're captured," he said softly, "remember one thing. Boston Harbor, autumn stars." "What does that mean?" "It was our cipher key. The phrase that unlocked our private correspondence when we were apart." His eyes held hers. "If Hargrove's men take you, focus on those words. They might help protect what's left of your memory." Before she could ask more, a voice called from the darkness. "Maxwell, we know you're up there, the woman too. Make this easy on yourselves." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "Blackwell," he muttered, "Hargrove's right hand." "Do we run?" Isabel asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. He shook his head. 3 exits from this ridge. They'll have all covered." His eyes met hers. "We fight." As if to punctuate his words, a shot rang out, splintering bark just inches from his head. Maxwell returned fire in a single fluid motion, and a cry of pain echoed from below. 2 on the East Trail, Ezra called, 1 trying to circle north. Maxwell nodded, signaling a plan without words. Ezra would take the northern threat, Maxwell would handle the East Trail. That left Isabel to watch their backs, in case someone circled behind. More shots rang out, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the trees below. Isabel pressed herself against a boulder, gun raised, heart thundering in her ears. This was madness. She was no gunfighter, no outlaw. She was a woman with no memory, caught in a conflict she barely understood. And yet, as another shot cracked, through the night, something shifted within her, a clarity, a focus that felt at once foreign and deeply familiar. Her hands steadied, her breathing slowed. Her senses sharpened, cataloguing sounds, movements, possibilities. Movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from the trees behind their camp, approaching with cautious stealth. Without conscious thought, Isabel raised her revolver, aimed and fired. The shadow crumpled with a strangled cry. "Behind us!" she called to Maxwell, surprising herself with the command in her voice. He glanced back, nodding acknowledgement before returning his attention to the eastern approach. More shots were exchanged, the gunfire briefly illuminating the night in staccato bursts of orange and yellow. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the shooting stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of retreating hoofbeats and Ezra's heavy breathing as he rejoined them. "They're falling back," the big man reported, blood streaming from a graze on his forearm. "One dead, 2 wounded by my count." "3 wounded," Maxwell corrected, gesturing toward where Isabel's shot had found its mark. "They'll regroup, come back with more men." He turned to Isabel, eyes searching her face. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, still processing what had just happened. How naturally she had responded to the threat, how easily her body had remembered what her mind could not. "I shot someone," she said, her voice faint with disbelief. "You protected us," Maxwell countered. "Eleanor or not, some things remain in the blood." He holstered his weapon and began quickly gathering their essential supplies. "We need to move. They'll be back at first light, and we need to reach Chen before they do." As they hastily broke camp and saddled the horses, Isabel found herself returning to the spot where her bullet had found its target. The man lay still, face down in the pine needles, a dark stain spreading beneath him. She knelt, carefully turning him over. He was young, no more than 25, with a face that still held traces of boyhood beneath its frontier weathering. His chest rose and fell weakly. Her shot had struck his shoulder, serious but not immediately fatal. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with difficulty. "You," he rasped, "the Maxwell woman." "Who sent you?" she demanded, surprising herself with her own authority. A wet cough shook him. "Hargrove sends his regards. Says you'll be coming. Home soon." Isabel's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" But the young man's eyes had closed again, consciousness slipping away with each labored breath. Maxwell appeared at her side, surveying the scene with a practiced eye. "He won't make it till morning," he said quietly, "not without help." "We can't just leave him," Isabel protested. Maxwell studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Once Ezra, bind his wound. Bring him with us as far as Silver Creek. We'll leave him with Chen." As Ezra tended to the wounded man, Maxwell drew Isabel aside. "That was Eleanor talking just now," he said, his voice low. "She never could leave anyone to die alone either." "It's basic humanity," Isabel argued, "not a sign of returning. Memory, perhaps." His eyes held hers. "But you held that gun like you'd never stopped using it. Your shot was clean, precise. Those instincts don't come from Isabel Reed, the quiet widow of Copper Springs." She had no response to that, because he was right. The way she had handled the weapon, the clarity that had descended during the crisis, these things had emerged from somewhere deep within her, somewhere beyond her conscious reach. "Boston Harbor, autumn stars," she repeated softly. "Why would that phrase protect my memory?" Maxwell secured the last of their supplies to his saddle before answering. "Because it's connected to the night you decided to marry me. The night you chose a different path than the one laid out for you." He mounted his horse with fluid grace. "Some choices run deeper than memory. They become part of who you are." As they rode away from the ridge, the wounded man secured a cross. Ezra's saddle, the first hints of dawn, began to lighten the eastern sky. Isabel felt herself caught between worlds, the fading shadow of Isabel Reed, the ghostly outline of Eleanor Maxwell, and something else emerging between them, forged. In the crucible of danger and truth, she didn't yet know who she would become when this journey ended. But for the first time since waking in Copper Springs with no memory, she believed she might have the freedom to choose. Silver Creek had once been a prosperous mining town, built on the dreams of independent prospectors. Now it stood as a testament to corporate dominion, a company settlement where every building, every business, and seemingly every breath drawn fell under the shadow of Silver Creek Consolidated Mining. They approached from the western ridge just after sunrise, the town spread below them like a tarnished coin in the morning light. Unlike the scattered organic growth of most frontier settlements, Silver Creek had been rebuilt with ruthless efficiency. The miners' quarters, neat rows of identical cabins, stood segregated from the larger homes of supervisors and administrators. The company store dominated the main street, flanked by a sturdy jailhouse and an office bearing the SCCM insignia. A tall fence surrounded the mine entrance at the far end of town, where men already swarmed like ants around the yawning pit. "That's new," Maxwell murmured, nodding toward a watchtower standing near the northern edge of town. Armed guards were visible even at this distance. "They've militarized since we were last here." "Mining companies always bring their own law," Ezra added grimly, adjusting the wounded man who hung semi-conscious across his saddle. "This one just doesn't pretend otherwise." Isabel studied the settlement, searching for any spark of recognition, any hint that she had once lived nearby. Nothing stirred in her memory. Not the arrangement of buildings, not the surrounding landscape. If she had been Eleanor Maxwell here, that woman had left no trace within her. "How do we find Chen without alerting the company?" she asked. Maxwell pointed to a small cabin set apart from the others, near a copse of aspen trees. "He lives there, on the edge of their territory. Treats miners and their families after hours, when the company doctor has gone home. And during the day, he works in their infirmary." Maxwell's expression darkened. Not by choice. The company made it clear that his alternatives were limited. They skirted the main road, approaching the town from a narrow deer trail that kept them hidden within the tree line. As they neared Chen's cabin, Maxwell signaled for them to dismount and proceed on foot, tethering their horses in a secluded thicket. "Ezra, stay with our guest," he instructed, nodding toward the wounded man. "If he wakes, keep him quiet. If he tries anything—" He left the consequence unspoken. Ezra nodded, settling against a tree trunk, rifle balanced across his knees. The wounded man groaned softly but didn't regain consciousness. His breathing had grown more labored during their journey, his skin waxy in the morning light. Without medical attention soon, he wouldn't survive the day. Maxwell led Isabel through, the trees moving with the silent efficiency of a man accustomed to avoiding notice. She found herself mimicking his movements instinctively, placing her feet carefully, staying low, using the terrain for cover. Again, that strange disconnect between her mind and body struck her. She had no memory of learning these skills, yet her muscles remembered. Chen's cabin appeared deserted as they approached. No smoke from the chimney, no movement visible through the single window. Maxwell circled once, checking for signs of habitation, then approached the door. "He may already be at the infirmary," Isabel whispered. Maxwell shook his head. "Chen keeps odd hours. The company tolerates it because he's the only doctor within 50 miles with surgical training." He rapped softly on the door, a distinctive pattern. 3 quick knocks, a pause, 2 more. Silence followed, stretching long enough that Isabel began to think the cabin truly was empty. Then, faintly, came the sound of movement inside, The scrape of a chair, footsteps approaching with careful deliberation. The door opened a crack, revealing a sliver of face, almond-shaped eyes above. "A salt and pepper beard. The dead should stay buried, Maxwell," the man said in accented English, his voice low and tense. "Especially when the grave was dug by federal marshals." "My death was greatly exaggerated," Maxwell replied, "and my need for your help outweighs the risk of resurrection." The door opened wider, revealing a slender man in his 50s, dressed simply in a collarless shirt and worn trousers. His eyes moved from Maxwell to Isabel, widening slightly in recognition. "You found her," he said softly, "after all this time." Maxwell nodded once. "And we have a man wounded in the woods, Hargroves, shot in the shoulder." Dr. Chen's expression hardened. "You bring Hargroves' men to my door? Have you lost your mind?" "The man has information we need, and Hargrove already knows we're here. His men ambushed us on the ridge last night." Maxwell's voice remained calm, reasonable. "Help us, Abraham, for old time's sake." The doctor hesitated, gaze returning to Isabel. "Does she remember?" "No," Maxwell said. "That's the other reason we've come." A long moment passed as Chen weighed his options, his intelligent eyes moving between them. Finally, he stepped back from the doorway. "Bring the wounded man to the cellar entrance at the back of the cabin. Quickly, before the day shift changes at the mine." Maxwell turned to retrieve Ezra and their prisoner, leaving Isabel alone with the doctor. Chen studied her with clinical interest, his gaze analytical rather than intrusive. "You truly don't remember me?" he asked. Isabel shook her head. "I don't remember anything before 4 years ago. Not you, not Maxwell, not myself." Chen's expression softened with what might have been sympathy. "A clean slate. Hargrove's obsession." He sighed, gesturing for her to enter the cabin. "Come in. We have much to discuss and little time." The interior of the cabin was surprisingly spacious, divided into a living area and a well-equipped medical space. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with books, jars of substances, and medical instruments. A desk in the corner overflowed with papers and journals, many covered with neat, precise handwriting in both English and Chinese characters. "You knew me," Isabel said. Not a question, but a statement. "Before," Chen nodded, moving to clear space on an examination table. "I treated you and Maxwell after the attack on your ranch. He was near death. Gunshot wound to the chest, significant blood loss. You suffered head trauma, but your physical injuries were less severe." He paused, meeting her gaze directly. "The damage to your mind came later, at Hargrove's hands." Maxwell told me Hargrove used drugs, experimental compounds. Yes, developed initially for military applications. Chen's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he prepared bandages and instruments. "I worked on early versions of these compounds during the war, as treatments for soldiers with severe battle trauma. The goal was healing, helping men function, despite their experiences, but Hargrove used them differently. Hargrove perverted the research." Chen's voice took on an edge. "He discovered that certain combinations, administered under specific conditions, could create temporary cognitive malleability. With sustained use and proper conditioning, a person's entire self-conception could be reshaped." The door opened behind them as Maxwell and Ezra entered, carrying the unconscious wounded man between them. They placed him carefully on the examination table. Chen immediately set to work, cutting away the blood-soaked shirt to expose the wound. "Bullet's still inside," he announced after a brief examination. "I'll need to extract it." He glanced at Isabel. "You should wait outside. This won't be pleasant." "She stays," Maxwell said before she could respond. "We both need to question him when he's lucid." Chen raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Hold him down then. I have no chloroform to spare on Hargrove's men." What followed tested Isabel's fortitude to its limits. Chen worked with remarkable skill, but without anesthesia, the procedure was brutal. The wounded man regained consciousness halfway through the extraction, his screams muffled by the leather strap Ezra placed between his teeth. Isabel found herself assisting automatically, passing instruments, applying pressure to staunch bleeding, wiping away sweat from Chen's brow. Again, that disconnect. Her conscious mind recoiled from the gore, while her hands moved with the confidence of experience. "You've done this before," Chen observed during a brief pause. "Apparently," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "The time the bullet lay extracted in a metal dish and the wound was cleaned and bandaged, midday sun streamed through the cabin windows. The patient had lapsed back into unconsciousness, his breathing more regular now, color slowly returning to his face. "He'll live," Chen pronounced, washing blood from his hands in a basin. "Whether that's a mercy remains to be seen." Maxwell, who had observed the procedure in silence, stepped forward. "When will he be able to talk?" "A few hours, perhaps. The body needs time to recover from such an insult." Chen dried his hands on a clean cloth, looking thoughtful. "I can give him something to hasten his awakening, but it would strain his heart." "Do it," Maxwell said without hesitation. "We don't have the luxury of time." Chen nodded, selecting a small vial from his collection. As he administered the stimulant to the wounded man, Ezra moved to keep watch by the window. "Company men making rounds," he reported. "2 guards, armed." "Routine patrol," Chen said, not looking up from his patient. "They check the perimeter of town 3 times daily. They won't approach the cabin without cause. And if they saw us arrive," Isabel asked, "then we would already be having a different conversation." Chen's calm demeanor spoke of a man long accustomed to walking dangerous lines. "The company prefers efficiency to thoroughness. Their guards watch for obvious threats. Union organizers claim jumpers, deserters, 3 riders avoiding the main. Road would concern them only if someone specifically ordered extra vigilance." "Someone like Hargrove," Maxwell added grimly. "Indeed." Chen administered a second dose from the vial. "Which is why we must work quickly. My absence from the infirmary will be noted soon." As if responding to the doctor's urgency, the wounded man stirred, eyelids fluttering. A groan escaped his lips as consciousness returned, bringing with it the full force of his pain. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharpening as he registered his surroundings. When his gaze fell on Maxwell, fear flooded his expression. "Where?" he began, voice cracking. "Silver Creek," Maxwell answered, moving to stand over him. "Dr. Chen has removed the bullet from your shoulder. You'll live, if you cooperate." The young man swallowed hard, eyes darting between the faces surrounding him. "You're going to kill me anyway." "If we wanted you dead, we would have left you on the ridge," Isabel said, surprised by the authority in her own voice. "Help us, and you may yet see another sunrise." Something in her tone reached him. He nodded weakly. "What do you want to know?" "Your name, for starters," Maxwell said. Thomas Jenkins." "Where is Hargrove, Thomas?" The wounded man hesitated, conflict plain on his face. "I don't know exactly. He moves constantly, but you have a way to contact him," Maxwell pressed. "A rendezvous point, a message drop, something." Jenkins licked dry lips. "There's a way station, 20 miles east of here. He gets reports there every 3rd day." "From whom?" "The company overseer, man named Garrett." A shudder passed through Jenkins as pain flared in his shoulder. "Garrett keeps Hargrove informed about company operations and about anyone asking questions." Maxwell and Chen exchanged a significant look. "Garrett is the new Mountain Division supervisor," Chen explained. "Arrived 6 months ago from Washington. He's been systematically replacing senior miners with new men, all of them former soldiers with connections to Hargrove's wartime unit." "Building his own private army," Maxwell murmured. Jenkins nodded weakly. "More than that." They're different. The new men. They follow orders without question, no fear, no hesitation. His eyes found Isabel's. Like they aren't fully themselves anymore. A chill ran through her. More of Hargrove's experiments? Different methods, same goal, Jenkins confirmed. Control without chains, loyalty without conscience. When is the next report due at the way station? Maxwell asked. Tomorrow. Dawn. Jenkins's eyes fluttered as the stimulant began to wear off. Garrett brings the pouches himself. Always armed, always with at least 2 guards. Maxwell straightened, decision made. We intercept Garrett before he reaches the way station, take his report, learn what Hargrove is planning, and where to find him. And then, Isabel asked, then we end this. The cold certainty in Maxwell's voice left no doubt as to his meaning. As Jenkins drifted back into unconsciousness, Chen gestured for them to follow him to a back room of the cabin. Unlike the ordered medical space, this smaller room was cluttered with research materials, journals stacked in precarious towers, specimen jars containing unidentifiable substances, chalk-covered slates bearing complex chemical formulas. Before you pursue Hargrove, there is something you should know, Chen said, closing the door behind them, about Eleanor's condition. Isabel felt a strange disconnection at hearing herself referred to in the third person, as if Eleanor were someone else entirely, a sister perhaps, or a friend long absent. What about it? Maxwell asked, his voice carefully neutral. Chen selected a journal from one of the stacks, opening it to a marked page. I've continued my research into the compounds Hargrove used, their effects, potential counteragents, long-term prognosis for recovery. He looked up, his expression grave. The longer the separation between original personality and constructed identity, the more difficult reintegration becomes. Meaning what, exactly? Isabel asked. Meaning that after 4 years, attempting to forcibly recover your memories could be dangerous, potentially fatal. Chen turned the journal so they could see a series of clinical notes and diagrams. The mind creates defenses, walls between what was lost and what was built. Breaking those walls could damage the structures on both sides. Maxwell's jaw tightened. You're saying we should abandon any attempt to recover Eleanor's memories? I'm saying, proceed with extreme caution. Chen turned to Isabel. You've already experienced some bleed-through, yes? Muscle memory, instinctive responses, perhaps emotional reactions that seem disconnected from your conscious experience. She nodded, thinking of the gunfight on the ridge, of how naturally she had assisted during the surgery. It's as if my body remembers things my mind doesn't, because different types of memory are stored in different regions of the brain. Procedural memory, how to shoot a gun, how to ride a horse, how to assist in surgery. These reside in areas less affected by Hargrove's techniques. And personal memories? Identity? Maxwell asked. Chen's expression grew somber. More deeply, suppressed, more dangerous to access directly. He selected a small vial from a cabinet, holding it up to the light. The liquid inside shimmered with an opalescent quality, neither fully transparent nor opaque. I've been developing this since learning of Hargrove's experiments. A compound designed to gently dissolve the barriers he created, allowing natural memory recovery over time. Does it work? Isabel asked, eyeing the vial with equal parts hope and apprehension. In limited trials with minors who had undergone company treatments, yes, but never on someone who experienced the full protocol. Used on you. Chen placed the vial carefully on the desk. It represents your best chance of recovery without catastrophic mental collapse, but I cannot guarantee success or safety. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Isabel looked from the vial to Maxwell, whose expression had grown unreadable. What would it do exactly? The compound works subtly in stages, Chen explained. First, it would increase the permeability between memory regions, accelerating the bleed-through you've already experienced. Procedural memories would become more accessible, followed by emotional memories, and eventually, if successful, autobiographical ones. Side effects, Maxwell asked, his voice tight. Disorientation, confusion as competing memories surface, possible physical symptoms, headaches, nausea, vertigo. Chen hesitated. And in some cases, periods of identity dissolution where neither Eleanor nor Isabel would be fully present. Isabel absorbed this, her mind racing. The opportunity to recover her past, to know who she truly was, beckoned powerfully. But the risk of losing what stability she had managed to build, of becoming someone trapped between identities, was equally daunting. "It's your choice," Maxwell said quietly, surprising her. "I won't influence your decision either way." She studied him, searching for any hint of preference beneath his carefully neutral expression. "But you want Eleanor back." "I want you to be whole," he corrected. "Whatever that means, whoever that is." The simplicity of his statement caught her off guard. No pressure, no expectation. Just the clear statement of a man who had somehow, despite his fearsome reputation, placed her well-being above his own. Desires. How long would the process take, she asked Chen. Days for the initial effects, weeks for substantial recovery, months for full integration, if it occurs at all. The doctor's gaze was compassionate but unflinching. And once begun, it cannot be easily halted. The barriers once breached remain permeable. Isabel turned the vial in her hand, watching the liquid catch the light. Inside this small glass tube lay potential answers to the questions that had haunted her since waking in Copper Springs with no past, who she had been, what she had loved, how she had lived. But it also contained the risk of losing the self she had constructed in the years since. "I need time to consider," she said finally. Chen nodded. "A wise approach, but not too much time. The company will note my absence soon, and questions will follow." A sharp whistle from the front room interrupted them, Ezra's signal for approaching danger. Chen quickly secured the vial in Isabel's hand, closing her fingers around it. "Keep this with you. The formula exists only in my head and in this sample." His voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Whatever you decide about your own memory, this compound represents the only known counter to Hargrove's techniques. It must be preserved." They moved quickly back to the main room, where Ezra stood tense by the window. "Company men," he reported. 5 of them coming this way, not the regular. "Patrol!" Maxwell moved to peer carefully past the edge of the curtain. "Garrett's with them," he confirmed grimly. "They know we're here." Chen cursed softly in Chinese. "The back door, through the cellar. There's a tunnel that leads to the creek bed." "What about him?" Isabel nodded toward Jenkins, still unconscious on the examination table. "Leave him," Maxwell said without hesitation. "He served his purpose." "No." The word left her mouth before she fully formed the thought. "He helped us." "We take him." Maxwell's eyes met hers, something like approval flickering in their depths. "Ezra, carry him. Doctor, lead the way." As Chen moved a rug to reveal a trapdoor, a pounding came at the front door. "Dr. Chen, open up by order of Silver Creek Consolidated Mining." Chen ushered them quickly down into the cellar, a small space lined with shelves holding medical supplies and what appeared to be research materials. He pulled a lever disguised as a support beam, and a section of the stone wall swung inward, revealing a narrow tunnel beyond. "This leads to the creek. A quarter-mile east," he explained, handing Maxwell a small lantern. "Follow it to where it opens behind the falls. You can reach your horses from there without being seen." "You're not coming?" Isabel asked, sudden concern gripping her. Chen shook his head. "I must remain." Disappearing would only confirm their suspicions and bring more scrutiny. His eyes moved to the vial clutched in her hand. "Remember what I told you. The choice is yours, but the consequences reach beyond yourself." The pounding at the door grew more insistent. Wood splintered as someone applied a boot or a rifle butt to the frame. "Go," Chen urged. "Find Hargrove. End what he started." Maxwell hesitated only a moment before nodding once, a gesture of respect between men who understood sacrifice. Then he led the way into the tunnel, lantern held high, Ezra following with Jenkins draped over his shoulder. Isabel paused at the entrance, looking back at the doctor, who had given them both knowledge and new questions. "Thank you," she said simply. Chen smiled faintly. "She said that to me once before, too, the woman you were, when I pulled the bullet from Maxwell's chest." His eyes held a sad wisdom. Some patterns persist, even when memory fails. As the hidden door swung closed behind her, leaving Chen to face whatever came through his front door, Isabel clutched the vial of opalescent liquid against her heart. Within it lay the key to her past, and perhaps, though she could not yet know it, the salvation of others who had fallen victim to Hargrove's dark science. Ahead in the tunnel, Maxwell's lantern cast long shadows that danced like memories just beyond her grasp. She followed its light, stepping carefully into an uncertain future while carrying the means to reclaim her past. Twilight shrouded the plains in purple shadow as Isabel crouched behind a weathered outcropping of rock, watching the way station through field glasses. The structure stood isolated against the darkening sky, a small, sturdy building of stone and timber that had once served as a Pony Express stop before the transcontinental telegraph rendered such stations obsolete. Now it performed a different function, a secluded exchange point where Silver Creek Mining Company and Marshall Hargrove conducted their clandestine business. "Anything?" Maxwell's voice came low beside her, his breath visible in the cooling evening. "Air?" She shook her head, adjusting the focus of the glasses. "No movement, no lights. If Garrett's men are already inside, they're keeping a low profile." They had traveled hard since escaping Chen's tunnel, riding east across terrain that grew progressively more barren. The wounded man Jenkins had regained consciousness during the journey, proving surprisingly cooperative once he understood the full scope of Hargrove's operations. Now he lay in a sheltered gully 100 yards back, guarded by Ezra, while Maxwell and Isabel conducted their reconnaissance. "The rendezvous isn't until dawn," Maxwell reminded her, taking the glasses to conduct his own survey. "Garrett likely won't arrive until first light. This gives us time to prepare." Isabel nodded, settling back against the rock. Her body ached from the hard ride, and fatigue pulled at her like weighted chains. 3 days had passed since her narrow escape from the gallows in Copper Springs, yet it felt like a lifetime. The woman who had stood with a noose around her neck seemed like a stranger now, a pale sketch compared to the increasingly vivid reality of her present self. "You should rest," Maxwell said, noting her exhaustion. "I'll take first watch." She started to protest, then reconsidered. She would be of no use in the coming confrontation if she could barely keep her eyes open. "Wake me in 4 hours," she agreed, wrapping her coat more tightly around herself as she settled into a relatively sheltered spot among the rocks. As she drifted toward sleep, her hand unconsciously moved to the small vial tucked securely in an inner pocket of her vest. Chen's compound, the potential key to her lost memories, had become a tangible weight she carried both physically and metaphorically. The decision whether to use it loomed larger with each passing hour. Her dreams, when they came, were fragmented and disorienting, flashes of unfamiliar places and faces that evaporated upon waking. A classroom filled with children's voices, a cabin with wildflowers on the table, hands interlaced with hers, strong and calloused yet gentle. None of it held long enough to grasp, like trying to capture smoke in cupped palms. Maxwell woke her. As the moon reached its zenith, the surrounding plains bathed in silver light. "All quiet," he reported. "No movement on the road or at the station." Isabel nodded, still disoriented from her dreams. She accepted the canteen he offered, the water cool and bracing. "I'll watch until dawn," she said. "You need rest too." He hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to relying on others for security. Then, with a brief nod, he moved to the spot she had vacated, his rifle never far from his grasp. Within minutes, his breathing deepened and slowed, the rest of a man trained to snatch sleep in small, efficient increments. Alone with the night, Isabel settled into her vigil. The vast prairie stretched around them like a frozen sea, the way station a dark island in its midst. She had the strange sense of standing outside of time itself, suspended between the person she had been and whoever she might become. Almost without conscious thought, she removed the vial from her pocket, studying it in the moonlight. The liquid inside seemed to capture and amplify the silver glow, transforming it into something ethereal. "A few drops under her tongue," Chen had explained. That was all it would take to begin dissolving the walls Hargrove had built around her. True self, her fingers traced the stopper, temptation whispering through her. Why not now? Why wait? What would happen if Eleanor began to surface before they confronted Hargrove? Would her knowledge, her experiences, provide an advantage they desperately needed? Or would the confusion Chen had warned about compromise her ability to function at the critical moment? With a sigh, she returned the vial to her pocket. This wasn't the time. She needed clarity, focus, not the disorientation of competing identities struggling for dominance. That moment would come, but not tonight. Not with dawn approaching and Garrett's arrival imminent. The eastern sky had just begun to lighten when movement on the distant road caught her attention. She raised the field glasses, focusing on a small party approaching from the direction of Silver Creek. 3 riders moving at a steady pace, their forms still indistinct in the pre-dawn gloom. "Maxwell," she called softly, not taking her eyes from the glasses. "Company coming." He was instantly alert, moving to her side with the fluid efficiency that still startled her. "How many?" 3. Still about 2 miles out. She handed him the glasses. "Garrett?" Maxwell studied the approaching riders, his expression hardening. "Yes, with 2 guards, as Jenkins said." He lowered the glasses. "Time to move. Wake Ezra and bring Jenkins. I want him to confirm Garrett's identity before we act." While Maxwell finalized their ambush preparations, Isabel returned to the gully where Ezra kept watch over their prisoner. Jenkins was already awake, his face pale with pain, but his eyes clear. "They're coming," she told them both. 3 riders from the west. Ezra nodded, helping Jenkins to his feet. The wounded man swayed slightly but remained upright. "I'll cooperate," he said, meeting Isabel's gaze directly. "I want you to know that." "Why?" she asked, genuinely curious. "You were loyal to Hargrove before." Jenkins looked away, something like shame crossing his features. "I didn't know what he was really doing. The experiments on the miners, the memory alterations. I thought we were just providing security services to the company." He met her eyes again. "When I saw what happened to some of those men, good men with families, something broke in me. But by then I was in too deep." His words rang with a sincerity that surprised her. "So helping us is your redemption?" she asked, not unkindly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe. Or maybe I just prefer not to be on the wrong side of Jackson Maxwell's gun." They rejoined Maxwell at the outcropping, where he had positioned himself with clear sightlines to the approaching riders and the way station. His plan was straightforward. Intercept Garrett before he reached the station, use Jenkins to gain momentary compliance, then overpower the group and seize whatever communications were intended for Hargrove. "Remember," Maxwell instructed as they took their positions, "Garrett is the priority. We need him alive and talking. The guards are expendable if necessary. The sun breached the horizon as the riders approached the final stretch of road leading to the way station. In the clear morning light, Isabel could make out details without the field glasses. A tall man in a dark coat riding point, flanked by two younger men with rifles slung across their backs. All three wore the silver insignia of Silver Creek Consolidated Mining on their lapels. "That's Garrett," Jenkins confirmed in a whisper. "The one in front. The others are part of his security detail. Former soldiers, both of them." Maxwell nodded, checking his weapon one final time. "On my signal," he murmured to Ezra, who had positioned himself on the opposite side of the road. The riders had slowed as they approached the way station, eyes scanning their surroundings with practiced caution. They were less than 50 yards away when Maxwell gave the signal, a sharp, short whistle that cut through the morning stillness. Ezra emerged from his hiding place first, rifle raised but not yet aimed directly at the riders. "Morning, gentlemen," he called, his tone deceptively casual. Bit early for a social call. The riders reacted instantly, hands moving to weapons. But before they could draw, Maxwell stepped into view from the opposite side, his gun already leveled. "At Garrett." "I wouldn't," he advised calmly, "unless you're particularly eager to die today." Garrett, a sharp-featured man in his 40s with cold eyes and a military bearing, assessed the situation with remarkable composure. "Jackson Maxwell," he said, recognition and something like grudging respect in his voice. "Reports of your demise were apparently premature. A common misconception," Maxwell replied, "one I've found useful from time to time." The two guards remained tense, hands hovering near their weapons, gazes shifting between Maxwell and Ezra as they calculated odds. Isabel could read the intent in their posture. They were preparing to draw despite the disadvantage. "Thomas?" she called, her voice clear in the morning air. "Show yourself." Jenkins stepped forward from behind a rock, his wounded arm in a crude sling, his face visible to the riders. "Stand down," he told the guards. "This doesn't have to get bloody." Confusion and hesitation crossed the guards' faces. Garrett's expression, however, darkened with anger. "Jenkins, you treacherous dog. Hargrove will have your hide for this." "Hargrove isn't here," Jenkins replied steadily, "and I'm done following his orders." A tense silence fell, broken only by the snort of an uneasy horse. Then, with careful deliberation, Garrett raised his hands slightly. "What do you want?" "The dispatch pouch," Maxwell answered, "and information about Hargrove's whereabouts." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "What makes you think I know where Hargrove is?" "Because you're his link to Silver Creek operations, his right hand in the territory." Maxwell's gun remained unwavering. "And because if you don't tell us, this conversation will become considerably less civilized." For a moment, it seemed Garrett might resist. Then he sighed, nodding to the saddlebag on his horse. "The dispatches are there, take them, but I can't tell you what I don't know. Hargrove moves constantly, never shares his next location. Search them," Maxwell instructed Isabel. Carefully, she approached the horses cautiously, keeping a wary eye on the guards. The animals shifted nervously as she reached for Garrett's saddlebag, but didn't bolt. Inside, she found a leather pouch sealed with the mining company's insignia alongside a smaller packet wrapped in oilcloth. "Got it," she called, securing both items. "Dismount," Maxwell ordered the riders. "Slowly, hands where we can see them." The men complied with obvious reluctance, sliding from their saddles with measured movements. As the guards' feet touched the ground, however, something shifted in their demeanor. A strange blankness fell over their features, and they moved with an unnatural synchronization that sent a chill down Isabel's spine. "Maxwell," she began in warning, but it was already too late. The guards drew their weapons with inhuman speed, firing not at Maxwell or Ezra, but at Jenkins, the wounded man. Crumpled without a sound, 2 bullets finding his chest in quick succession. Before either Maxwell or Ezra could react, the guards had spun toward them, firing with mechanical precision. Ezra fell back with a grunt of pain, blood blossoming on his shoulder. Maxwell returned fire, dropping one guard with a clean shot to the head. The second guard continued his assault without hesitation or emotion, seemingly heedless of his companion's death. Isabel's body reacted before her mind fully processed what was happening. She dropped the leather pouch, drew her revolver, and fired at the remaining guard. Her bullet found his throat, and he fell, still pulling his trigger in death-locked reflex. In the sudden silence that followed, Garrett stood alone, hands still raised, a thin smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Impressive, aren't they?" he remarked, nodding toward the fallen guards. "Hargrove's latest innovation. Completely loyal, completely fearless, the perfect soldiers." Maxwell kept his gun trained on Garrett as he moved to check on Ezra. The big man was wounded but conscious, pressing a bandana to his bleeding shoulder with a grimace of pain. "I'll live," Ezra grunted. "See to Jenkins." But one look at the fallen man confirmed what they already knew. Jenkins lay motionless, eyes open and unseeing, blood pooling beneath him on the dusty ground. He had died instantly, exactly as the guards had been programmed to ensure. "Why?" Isabel demanded, turning to Garrett with her gun still raised. "He wasn't a threat to you." "He knew too much," Garrett replied with a shrug. "And he betrayed his oath. The penalty for that has always been clear." Maxwell's expression darkened with cold fury. Those men moved like machines. What did Hargrove do to them? A smile spread across Garrett's face, not the expression of a man facing armed opponents, but of someone who believed himself untouchable. He freed them from fear, from doubt, from the weaknesses that plague ordinary men. "He turned them into puppets," Isabel countered, disgust edging her voice. "He made them perfect," Garrett corrected. "Just as he tried to make you perfect, Mrs. Maxwell, a blank slate, ready for reprogramming. A shame you rejected his gift." Isabel felt a chill at his words. "Gift? He stole my life, my identity. He offered you liberation from the burden of memory, from guilt, from pain, from all the accumulated weight of existence." Garrett's eyes gleamed with the fervor of a true believer. "Imagine it, a world where trauma can be erased, where soldiers' need never suffer the agonies of their experiences, where any mind can be optimized." "Optimized for what?" Maxwell demanded. "Blind obedience, unquestioning violence? Those men didn't even try to save themselves." "Self-preservation is weakness," Garrett replied simply. "Hargrove has moved beyond such primitive instincts." Maxwell studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward the way station with his gun. "Inside, now. We're going to have a longer conversation about your employer's whereabouts." Garrett didn't resist as they led him into the way station, a sparse interior with a table, chairs, and a pot-bellied stove gone cold. Ezra secured the A. Stood behind them, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded shoulder. "Sit," Maxwell ordered, indicating a chair. Garrett complied with the calm demeanor of a man accustomed to setbacks, but confident in eventual victory. While Maxwell kept watch over their prisoner, Isabel tended to Ezra's wound, cleaning and bandaging it with supplies from their saddlebags. The bullet had passed through the flesh of his upper arm without striking bone, painful but not life-threatening if infection could be prevented. "I underestimated them," Ezra muttered, chagrined. "Never seen men move like that." "None of us had," she reassured him, securing the bandage. "Rest now. Maxwell and I will handle this." With Ezra settled as comfortably as possible on a narrow bench, Isabel turned her attention to the dispatches they had seized. The leather pouch contained several documents bearing the mining company's letterhead, production reports, security assessments, and a detailed account of subject compliance among the miners who had undergone treatment. The smaller packet, however, proved more illuminating. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed simply to M and signed with the initial H. Hargrove's personal correspondence to his field commander. "You'll want to see this," she said, handing the letter to Maxwell. He read it quickly, his expression growing harder with each line. "Phase 3 begins in 3 days, he said, looking up at Garrett. "What is Phase 3? Garrett's composure finally showed a crack, a flicker of surprise that suggested he hadn't expected the letter to be quite so explicit. "Progress," he answered after a moment, "the logical next step in Hargrove's work, which is wider application, beyond individual subjects to entire communities." A hint of pride crept into Garrett's voice. "Silver Creek is just the beginning, a testing ground. The compound has been refined, delivery methods perfected. Soon we'll be able to pacify entire regions with minimal resources." Isabel felt her blood run cold. "Pacify? You mean strip people of their memories, their identities?" "Selective modification only," Garrett corrected, as if explaining a minor, technical detail. "Removal of dissent, installation of compliance. The perfect solution to labor disputes, civil unrest, even crime." His eyes took on a zealot's gleam. "Imagine it. No more war, no more resistance to progress. Just orderly cooperation for the greater good." "Whose greater good?" Maxwell asked, his voice dangerously soft. Garrett smiled thinly. "America's, of course. The government has invested heavily in Hargrove's research. They see the potential. Both domestic and military. The delegates arrive in 3 days to witness the first large-scale demonstration." "In Silver Creek," Isabel said, the pieces falling into place. "That's why they've been replacing the senior miners with Hargrove's men. They're preparing for some kind of mass experiment on the town." Garrett nodded, seemingly pleased by her understanding. "The water supply will be treated with the new compound. By morning, every man, woman, and child in Silver Creek will be optimized for the new program. The perfect workforce, industrious, obedient, and without those inconvenient demands for safety or fair wages." Ezra cursed from his position on the bench. "Monsters, the whole damn town." "Where is Hargrove now?" Maxwell demanded, his gun pressing against Garrett's chest. "And don't tell me you don't know." For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Garrett's face. "He'll kill me if I betray him." "I'll kill you if you don't," Maxwell countered evenly. "The difference is, my way will be considerably quicker." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of wind rattling the way station's shutters. Finally, Garrett's shoulders slumped in resignation. "There's a compound on Reed's Plateau," he said, 10 miles north of Silver Creek. It's disguised as a sanitarium, Hillview Rest. That's where Hargrove conducts his most sensitive research." He met Maxwell's gaze directly. "But you'll never reach him. The compound is guarded by dozens of men like the ones outside. They won't stop until you're dead." Maxwell stepped back, considering this information. "When are the government delegates expected?" "Day after tomorrow. They arrive by private train, then travel to the compound for a briefing before the Silver Creek demonstration." A calculating look entered Garrett's eyes. "If you're planning what I think you are, you should know that security will be at its highest level." "Hargrove has planned for every contingency." "Not every contingency," Isabel said quietly, her hand moving to the pocket where Chen's vial rested. "He didn't plan for us." Garrett's expression shifted subtly as he studied her. "You still don't understand what you're dealing with, Mrs. Maxwell. Eleanor Isabel, whatever you call yourself now." A smile played at the edges of his mouth. "Did you think Hargrove simply erased your memories and left it at that? That he wouldn't build in safeguards against exactly this scenario?" Isabel felt a chill spread through her. "What are you talking about? Trigger phrases, embedded commands." Garrett's eyes never left hers. "Did you really believe you escaped his control just by leaving Copper Springs?" Maxwell moved between them, blocking Garrett's line of sight to Isabel. "That's enough," he said sharply, but the damage was already done. A cold dread had settled in Isabel's stomach. Was it possible? Had Hargrove planted commands within her altered consciousness, traps waiting to be sprung with the right words? The implications were staggering and terrifying. "What now?" she asked Maxwell, fighting to keep her voice steady. "If what he says is true, I could be a liability, a weapon Hargrove could use against us." Maxwell's expression remained impassive, but his eyes held a certainty that steadied her. "We continue as planned. Garrett comes with us to the compound. We use him to gain access, find Hargrove, and end his experiments before they can expand. And me? If I have triggers, we neutralize that possibility." Maxwell withdrew something. From his pocket, a small leather case, which he opened to reveal a syringe and vial. "Chen gave me this before we left. A temporary immunizing agent against Hargrove's compounds. It won't restore your memories, but it will block any embedded commands from taking effect for approximately 24 hours. Isabel stared at the syringe, a complex mixture of relief and apprehension washing through her. "You didn't mention this before." "Because I hoped we wouldn't need it," he admitted. "Using it isn't without risk. Chen said it could cause disturbances in your existing memory landscape, meaning it might accelerate the bleed-through of Eleanor's memories without the controlled integration Chen's other compound would provide." His eyes met hers. "It's your choice, but we need to decide quickly. Silver Creek is running out of time." Isabel looked from the syringe to Garrett, whose smug expression told her everything she needed to know about the reality of the threat. If Hargrove had indeed planted triggers within her mind, she could become an unwitting saboteur of their mission, or worse, a weapon against Maxwell himself. "Do it," she said, rolling up her sleeve. "Whatever happens to my memories, it's better than being Hargrove's puppet again." As Maxwell prepared the injection, Garrett watched with undisguised interest. "It won't matter," he said confidently. "You can't stop what's coming. Hargrove's work will transform the nation, with or without your interference." Isabel winced as the needle entered her arm, the solution burning slightly as it entered her bloodstream. "You're wrong," she told Garrett as Maxwell withdrew the syringe. "We're going to stop him, and then we're going to make sure people like you answer for what you've done." A strange sensation began to spread through her body. Not unpleasant, but disorienting, as if the ground beneath her feet had subtly shifted. Colors seemed briefly more vivid, sounds more distinct. Then, as quickly as it had come, the feeling subsided, leaving behind a peculiar clarity. "How do you feel?" Maxwell asked, his voice betraying a rare hint of concern. Isabel took a deep breath, cataloguing the sensations in her body. "Different," she admitted. "Clearer somehow, but still myself." She looked up at him, determination hardening her resolve. "Let's finish this, before anyone else suffers what I did." Outside, the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the plains. In the distance, the bodies of Garrett's guards lay where they had fallen, a grim reminder of what awaited them at Hargrove's compound. But as Isabel gathered their supplies and prepared for the journey north to Reed's Plateau, she felt something she hadn't experienced since waking in Copper Springs with no past: purpose. Whether she was Eleanor or Isabel, or someone else entirely, no longer seemed the most pressing question. Who she would become by confronting Hargrove and ending his experiments, that was what mattered now. The past could wait a little longer. First, they had a future to save. Hillview Rest rose from Reed's Plateau like a magnificent contradiction, a sprawling Victorian structure of pale stone and dark timber, its windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. From a distance, it appeared exactly as advertised, a peaceful sanitarium where the wealthy could recover from nervous conditions and spiritual exhaustion. Only upon closer inspection did its true nature reveal itself. The patrolling guards, moving with mechanical precision, the barred windows on the lower levels, the electrified fence disguised as ornamental ironwork. Isabel observed these details through field glasses as she lay concealed in the tall grass at the plateau's edge. Chen's immunizing agent had done more than protect her from potential trigger phrases. It had sharpened her perceptions, bringing an almost unsettling clarity to her observations. She could count the guards, note their patterns, identify vulnerabilities in the compound's security with an efficiency that felt both foreign and strangely natural. 14 guards visible on the perimeter, she reported to Maxwell, who lay beside her. Rotations every 20 minutes, 2-man teams, except at the main gate where they post 4. Consistent with Garrett's information, Maxwell agreed, his voice low. The real security is inside, the optimized soldiers. Behind them, Ezra kept watch over Garrett, who sat bound and gagged against the trunk of a solitary pine. Their prisoner had grown increasingly agitated as they approached the compound, his earlier confidence giving way to visible fear. Whatever awaited them inside Hillview, Garrett clearly dreaded facing it as their captive. The government delegation arrives tomorrow, Isabel reminded them. This is our only chance to stop Hargrove before Silver Creek becomes his demonstration. Maxwell nodded, his expression grave. We move at dusk. Garrett first as our ticket through the gate. Once inside, we locate Hargrove and his research. Destroy both. A simple plan, stated with the grim finality of a man who had spent years pursuing this moment. Yet the complexity of their mission hung unspoken between them. The guards to overcome, the unknown layout of the facility, and most pressingly, the nature of Hargrove's optimized soldiers who would defend him without fear or hesitation. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the plateau, Isabel found herself withdrawing the small vial of Chen's memory compound from her pocket. In the amber light, the opalescent liquid seemed to pulse with possibility. She had carried it all this way, throughout their journey from Silver Creek, through the confrontation at the way station, to this final approach. You're considering it, Maxwell observed quietly. Not a question, but a recognition. She nodded. If we're going in there, facing Hargrove, facing whatever he's created, shouldn't I do it with all the resources available to me? Eleanor's memories, her knowledge of Hargrove, they could make the difference. Or the disorientation could compromise. You at a critical moment. His voice held no judgment, only concern. Chen warned that the initial integration would be unpredictable. Nothing about any of this has been predictable, she countered, a hint of wry humor touching her voice. At least this would be my choice, my risk to take. Maxwell studied her for a long moment, the fading sunlight casting his scarred face in sharp relief. Whatever you decide, he said finally, know that it doesn't change who you are to me. The simple statement caught her off guard. And who am I to you, Maxwell? The wife you lost? The woman you saved from the gallows? Or something else entirely? His eyes held hers, direct and uncompromising. You're the woman who shot a man to protect strangers in Chen's cabin, who insisted we take Jenkins with us rather than leave him behind, who stands ready to face Hargrove despite everything he's done to you. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'd ride with that woman regardless of what name she chooses to carry. His words settled over her like a revelation. Throughout their journey, she'd been so fixated on recovering what was lost, the identity, the memories, the sense of wholeness that had been stolen from her. Yet in the process, she had been building something new, not Eleanor restored, not Isabel continued, but a third self forged in the crucible of their shared purpose. With steady hands, she uncorked the vial. We do this together, she said. Whatever happens, Before doubt could intrude, she placed 3 drops of the compound under her tongue, as Chen had instructed. The liquid was bitter, with an undertaste like copper and something unidentifiable, ancient and earthy. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the world shifted, colors intensified, sounds sharpened. The boundary between present and past began to blur, not in the chaotic manner she had feared, but like a slow dissolve. Translucent layers of memory settling over her current perceptions, without obscuring them. She saw the compound before her, but simultaneously glimpsed a small ranch house with wildflowers on the porch. She felt the cool evening air, but also the phantom sensation of chalk dust on her fingers. Most distinctly, she looked at Maxwell and recognized him twice as the hard, scarred man who had saved her from the gallows, and as a younger, softer version who had once placed a ring on her finger beneath a canopy of autumn stars, Eleanor. Maxwell's voice reached her through the cascade of returning memories, concern evident in his tone. "I'm here," she answered, blinking as the world stabilized around her. "Both of us. It's strange, like looking through 2 windows simultaneously." She took a deep breath, centering herself in the present moment while allowing the memories to settle into place. "But I can function, and I remember Hargrove." The name carried new weight now, attached to a face and a history that had been inaccessible moments before. She remembered him as Eleanor had known him, a government researcher who had visited their ranch under the pretense of recruiting Maxwell for security work. A man whose cold eyes had assessed her as one might appraise furniture, a threat she had sensed but couldn't name. "He came to us before the attack," she said, the memory unfurling with crystal clarity. "He wanted you for something. You refused. That's when they burned the ranch." Her eyes widened with sudden understanding. "I wasn't just collateral damage. I was the target all along. He wanted a subject for his experiments, someone isolated, without family connections. When you survived—" He adjusted his plan, Maxwell finished grimly. "Used you to perfect his techniques before expanding to larger applications." The implication sent a chill through her. How many others had there been after her? How many identities erased, memories rewritten, lives redirected according to Hargrove's designs? The scope of his ambition, culminating in tomorrow's planned demonstration at Silver Creek, was monstrous beyond measure. "We end this tonight," she said, rising to her feet with newfound purpose, "before anyone else suffers what I did." Dusk had fallen fully by the time they approached the compound's main gate, Garrett walking stiffly ahead of them with Maxwell's gun pressed to his back. Ezra had remained behind, his wounded shoulder making him a liability in what promised to be a combat situation. Instead, he would secure their escape route, and if they failed to return by dawn, ride to warn Silver Creek of the impending danger. The guards at the gate straightened as they approached, hands moving to their weapons. "Halt!" one called. "State your business, Director Garrett," Maxwell answered, nudging their prisoner forward, returning with priority information for Marshal Hargrove. The guard's eyes narrowed as he took in Garrett's disheveled appearance and the strangers accompanying him. "Identification?" Garrett fumbled in his coat pocket, producing an official-looking badge, which the guard examined carefully. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded to his companion who opened the gate. "The Marshal is in the East Wing laboratory. He left orders not to be disturbed." "He'll want to see this," Maxwell replied smoothly. "Concerns tomorrow's demonstration." As they moved through the gate and into the compound's central courtyard, Isabel felt a strange doubling of her consciousness. Eleanor's tactical assessment of their surroundings overlaying her own observations. The building's layout became clearer as buried knowledge resurfaced. Government facilities followed predictable patterns, administrative spaces in the West Wing, research laboratories in the East, holding cells for test subjects likely in the basement level, They entered through the main doors, moving with purposeful confidence through a grand foyer that belied the facility's true function. At this hour, the administrative staff had departed, leaving only security personnel and research teams. As they navigated the corridors toward the East Wing, they passed several white-coated technicians who barely glanced at them, recognizing Garrett, and assuming his companions were authorized. The laboratory wing was secured by a heavy door with both key and combination locks. Garrett, with reluctant cooperation, provided both. Beyond lay a sterile corridor lined with doors, each bearing a numeric designation rather than a name. "Which one?" Maxwell demanded, his voice low. Garrett hesitated, fear evident in his eyes. "End of the hall, 108. But you don't understand what you're walking into. Hargrove isn't alone. He has—" The words died in his throat as the door to Laboratory 108 swung open. A tall, slender man stepped into the corridor, impeccably dressed in a dark suit despite the late hour. His silver hair was precisely combed, his goatee neatly trimmed, his posture military straight. At the sight of the new arrivals, he paused, his expression registering first surprise, then a calculating interest. "Director Garrett," he said, his voice cultured and controlled. "This is unexpected." The memories crashed over Isabel like a tidal wave. Eleanor's memories of this man who had orchestrated her abduction, supervised her torture, and methodically disassembled her identity piece by piece. Marshal James Hargrove, the architect of her shattered self. "Marshal," she said, stepping forward, her voice steadier than she had thought possible. "We have unfinished business." Hargrove's eyes narrowed as he studied her, recognition dawning slowly. "Eleanor Maxwell," he said, a hint of professional admiration in his tone. "Extraordinary. The reintegration should have been impossible after such extensive conditioning." His gaze shifted to Maxwell, and the notorious outlaw himself. How tremendously inconvenient for everyone involved. Before either could respond, Hargrove made a slight gesture with his hand. Doors opened along the corridor, and men emerged. 6 of them, moving with the same unnatural synchronization they had witnessed in Garrett's guards at the way station. Their eyes held the same emptiness, their movements the same mechanical precision. "My colleagues from Washington would have been most interested to meet you both," Hargrove continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than a confrontation. "A successful reintegration subject and the man who managed to evade. Federal marshals for over 5 years, but I'm afraid that won't be possible now." Maxwell's gun shifted from Garrett to Hargrove, his aim unwavering. "Call off your puppets," he ordered. "This ends today." Hargrove smiled thinly. "No, Mr. Maxwell, this is merely a minor setback in an inevitable progression. Progress doesn't require your approval to advance." His eyes returned to Isabel. "Though I'm genuinely curious, how much of Eleanor have you recovered? The procedural memories, the emotional ones, or something deeper?" As he spoke, Hargrove's men had begun to move, spreading out to surround them. Unlike ordinary adversaries, they showed no fear, no hesitation, only the relentless focus of weapons aimed at a target. In that final moment, as options narrowed to a desperate few, Isabel felt a perfect clarity descend. Eleanor's tactical knowledge merged seamlessly with her own determination, creating a singular purpose that transcended the fractured identity she had carried for so long. With deliberate calm, she reached into her pocket and withdrew Chen's vial, now emptied of its memory compound but refilled with something else. Something Garrett hadn't noticed when they'd made their brief stop at Silver Creek's telegraph office on their way to Reed's Plateau. "Enough to remember this," she said, holding up the vial. "Nitroglycerin, extremely unstable. From the mining company's own supplies." Her eyes locked with Hargrove's. "Your work dies with you, Marshal, here and now." Recognition and genuine fear flickered across Hargrove's face. "You wouldn't," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "You'd die too." She smiled, not Isabel's smile, nor quite Eleanor's, but something uniquely her own. Better to die free than live as someone else's creation. Her fingers tightened. "Around the vial, but you have a choice. Order your men to stand down. Surrender your research. Face justice for what you've done." A tense silence fell over the corridor. Hargrove's calculating eyes moved from the vial to her face, measuring resolve against risk. Maxwell stood, motionless beside her, his gun still, trained on Hargrove, understanding and acceptance in his stance. "You're bluffing," Hargrove said finally, but doubt threaded through his words. "Test me," she replied softly. The moment stretched, balanced on a knife's edge of possibility. Then, with a nearly imperceptible nod, Hargrove signaled his men to lower their weapons. "A temporary setback," he said, the admission of defeat absent from his tone. Nothing more. But in his eyes, Isabel saw what he would never acknowledge. Aloud, that in recovering herself against all odds, she had delivered the most devastating blow possible to his life's work. She had proven that identity, once formed, could not be so easily erased. That memory, once lived, left traces that ran deeper than any chemical compound could reach. As Maxwell moved to restrain Hargrove and secure his research, Isabel felt the last fragments of her shattered self finally align, not perfectly, not without scars, but whole enough to move forward. Eleanor and Isabel, past and present, wound together into someone new, someone who had chosen her own path rather than walking one laid out by others. Was it really nitroglycerin? Maxwell asked later, as they rode away from the burning remains of Hillview Rest, Hargrove, and his research secured for delivery to federal authorities uncorrupted by his influence. She smiled, the expression coming more naturally now. "No, just water from Chen's well, but Hargrove built his career on the conviction that people are fundamentally predictable. He never considered that his greatest subject might learn to bluff." The sky lightened toward dawn as they descended from Reed's Plateau, the promise of a new day spreading before them. Whether she would be known as Eleanor or Isabel, or some name yet to be chosen, she rode toward that dawn, not as a woman reclaimed or restored, but as one reborn, through choice, through courage, and through the unbreakable thread of memory that had led her home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.